In today's gospel, Jesus and the religious authorities rise to a new level of mutual rejection. And Jesus leaves the Pharisees and scribes listing in the water, at least from our vantage point. Sort of. It would appear on the surface that this altercation over food is minimal, but it is actually very major. Now, how many times have you entered into a question or debate about what is seemingly an innocuous subject, only to emerge on the other side of a very serious argument? Maybe over politics, religion, a right way to hang a roll of toilet paper. Over, not under. One that I remember as purely innocent on my part, and I cannot say that very often. This was purely innocent on my part. Was my musings on an observation I made of a young German girl, an exchange student visiting my family with me. She was feeding the dog under the table at my mom's house. Now, the observation I made was about how dogs had entered into our lives, human lives, 100,000 to 200,000 years ago, by just what this young person was doing, feeding a begging dog, like feeding a wolf from the food of the campfire of our ancestors. I told you I was innocent. One of my family members quickly took me to task over that statement. The earth is, after all, only 6,000 years old. And after a lengthy and very loud verbal barrage from both sides, including words like ignorant, atheist, socialist, zombie, we retreated to our corners and licked our wounds as our exchange student was trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. I am not so sure that Jesus was the innocent one in this depiction in Mark today of the encounter between him and the Pharisees and scribes. I think he was waiting for this. He knew it was coming. The religious authorities knew it was coming too. They sent a delegation from Jerusalem just for this purpose, just to investigate, to confront Jesus. They were prepared to produce irrefutable evidence once and for all against how Jesus' teachings contrasted to their current religious orthodoxy. Sound familiar? Well, what was the evidence against Jesus? First, a little background. The ritualistic Old Testament food laws of Leviticus and the whole concept of ritual purity which underlies them, and there's a lot, were of central importance to certain Jews to mark the Jews as distinctive people of God. It divided Jews from Gentiles and was intended to separate them socially. Purity and impurity did not refer to soil or filth. Washing one's hand before one touched their food was not for hygiene, but for ritual purification. A non-Jew could have washed his hands all day and not become ritualistically pure. These laws made it impossible for Jews and non-Jews to share a meal. Now, this hand-washing ritual was controversial even among Jews. But many of the Pharisees and scribes adhered to these laws to clearly show that they maintained their separation from those they considered defiled. Now Mark has Jesus essentially drop a bomb on the argument by quoting from Isaiah and calling the Pharisaic group hypocrites. In finishing quoting Isaiah, their worship of me is empty when they teach human precepts as doctrines. Jesus says, by abandoning the command of God, you hold on to human tradition. Jesus then gives the Pharisees assembled an example of replacing God's law with human tradition, which we actually did not hear in the reading from Mark today. But Mark then has Jesus declaring all foods to be clean, thus providing ample evidence for the Pharisees. And then Jesus gives us the list. Now these lists always make me nervous. And I think they make some of you nervous. The list includes fornication, murder, adultery, avarice, and so on. Nobody escapes. Jesus gives this list as examples of what comes from within, whether we observe the food laws or not. The issue is where these things come from. They do not come from the ritualistically unclean food, the defiled food that we eat. Jesus says all these come from within, from our human hearts that pour forth these actions. All these evils pour out from within, and that is what makes a person unclean, according to Jesus. Whether they are Jew or Gentile, our actions are what defiles us. Now, in this episode of Mark discussing food laws, two major things just happened. The evidence that the authorities needed was gathered. The stage was set for Jesus' ultimate capture and death. The second thing was that Jesus just provided the hinge for his ministry to Jews and non-Jews. Jesus' ministry was not confined to those in the synagogue any longer. Following in the story of Mark is Jesus and his encounter with the Syrophoenician woman, a non-Jew. Now, what are our ritualistic hand-washing laws that we have that prevents our ministries from being taken and shared with those outside these four walls? What are our food laws that prevent us from sharing our Eucharistic feasts with those who are starving? Classism, racism. As good as I know this parish to be, some of us still suffer from the sin of racism. We get really nervous when it comes up in conversation. And some of us wrap that up in classism. I certainly have many times. But I'm not sure that that is any better, and it isn't. What about our personal piety prevents us from truly breaking bread with others here at the altar? The letter of James gave it to us pretty direct. But be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror. For they look at themselves and, on going away, immediately forget what they were like. Have we something to forgive those kneeling beside us here at the altar rails? Have we something for which to be forgiven but unconfessed? Are we holding a grievance against another that has become a ritual? Have we something to stop, something to end, some grievance concocted against another, some way that we are treating another that has also become ritualized? A ritual that needs to be confessed and repented of, so that we can be a doer of the word and not merely a hearer, as James says. We can shake our heads in disbelief at the Pharisees all we want and feel good about knowing that they were wrong. But when we look in James's mirror, we are no better than they if we separate ourselves because of our own precepts and not adhere to God's commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself, and as Christ said, love one another as I love you. If you take my words as an admonition, they are. But it is also, my brothers and sisters, the good news of Jesus Christ that we, knowing our faults and shortcomings, may transform ourselves through Him, become free, truly free, and have undefiled hearts before God, our Creator. Amen.